Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
So the grim warnings from the Polish Prime Minister, millions of more people on the march. I need to tell you that it is estimated the global refugee problem, migrant, whatever you want to call it, there's around 51 million people on this earth currently on the move, homeless, seeking to live elsewhere. That's getting on for the population of the United Kingdom. That is the size of the problem. And it's interested and impressed upon my next guest, Andrew now Lloyd Webber, who, of course, is the composer of so many shows. One we're going to talk about specifically, Cinderella, which is newish. It's come to the West End within the last month, a couple of months or so. And there's a gala which actually plays into what we're talking about. Andrew, thank you for coming by the studio.
Well, thank you very much.
Great to see you. You caught up with Malala, that tremendous author and human rights campaigner, and you really locked into her story and her issues, and again the empowerment of women, didn't you?
Indeed. Well, I've known Malala for a little while now, since before she went to Oxford, and she is one of the most impressive women you'll ever meet. And a wonderful father and mother too.
Unbelievable, 24 now.
I know. I mean, but anyway,
she's
she's extraordinary, and of course, her real mission is to help refugees. I think I've been listening to some of the calls on the way in, but whether we like it or not, the refugee issue and climate change, because climate change, of course, is very interlinked with the refugee issue, it's not going to go away. I think one has to remember that it could have been, say, you or I. I mean, we might suddenly have found ourselves in a state where, I mean, that's the people I've met, from Syria, are people who are, at the top of their professions. And it really, really struck home to me when I watched the Girls' Open final, and I saw these two wonderful girls and who spoke so beautifully afterwards. You sort of think, well, if you were a girl in Afghanistan right now and you saw that, what would you be thinking? And it suddenly made me feel I must call Malala and see what she was doing. And she, of course, through her charity, is very, very much involved with the area of helping particularly women refugees, and particularly in keeping their education going. Because suddenly you've got people whose education has been just literally stopped.
Yes.
And so, anyway, we hooked up and we thought, what could we do? And then I thought, well, really, Cinderella, of all things, in my version of it, is about a very liberated young woman.
Yes.
And this might be the absolutely right show for the cause.
I want to we'll talk more about Malala. Let's talk about Cinderella a bit, because I've had the pleasure and privilege indeed of seeing it. And it's important to get across. I mean, in a way, it should be spelt with an S, not a C. Your Cinderella creation, shouldn't it?
Well, you could put it that way, yeah. But it might sound like a rather unfortunate movie that we wouldn't really recommend to people at this time in the morning.
Give the story of your Cinderella, Andrew.
Well, yes, she's a rebel in a town of complete conformists where everybody is sort of in the most beautiful town ever. I mean, think Disney really on stilts, a kind of, and everybody has to be beautiful and everybody has to dress, with the latest thing and be a Kardashian. Cinderella in our story is not like that, and therefore is the town's outcast. But she sort of gets her way in the end. But what I can guarantee you is there's not a pumpkin in sight.
We'll talk about the special night on Monday in a moment. Back to the crisis now, as you say, and I gave a number, 51 million people, as we speak, are on the move. What should governments, possibly even the British government, be doing about this? Governments of Western countries, Andrew?
Well, it's a really, really difficult issue because, I mean, at the moment with all of these migrants so desperately trying to come to the country, you have to think what's behind all of this. And my feeling is that it's such a global issue now that it really can't now be swept under the carpet on another level. I think it's at the same level as climate change. As I say, I mean, it's so interlinked, isn't it? Because there are people who are actually becoming refugees due to climate change. And I just don't feel we can forget about it. And do you know, I don't know.
Right.
I mean, Britain is obviously a very, very crowded country in many ways. But if we at the same time turn a blind eye and just say all of these people have got to go back, and it's not going to work.
Well, it's also really not what Britain is about. Of
No,
course. It's meant we have
fundamentally. And America, of course, I mean, they are in many ways facing a similar problem, but they are letting people in. I mean, I was involved on the edges of being able to get a women's orchestra out of Afghanistan, and they are being allowed into America.
Out?
Yes, they're out. Yes, which is fantastic. And in fact, the conductor of the orchestra is coming to the gala on Monday.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, fantastic. Did we leave too many people behind in Afghanistan, do you think, Andrew?
Well, this is a really big issue, isn't it? Yes, of course. But I mean, we've got a very weird situation, so far as I can see there, in that in fact, there are so many different factions in the government. But what I think we got to realise now is that you've got, say, Tehran quite happily talking to, the Libyans.
Yes.
There's a very great deal going on that is really quite concerning. And I'm afraid the refugees are a byproduct of all of this, which we cannot, forget.
Can we talk a little bit about theatre?
Yes, of
course. We've talked about Afghanistan, we've talked about the United States, we've talked about France. I want to take you metaphorically to Scotland, where the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has said possibly vaccine passports could be required to go to the cinema or the theatre. And Lord Lloyd Webber, how do you react to that news?
Well, I've just got back from America. I've been in New York, where you can't buy a cup of coffee unless you're double vaccinated. You can't go into any building without proof of double vaccination. You can't go to the theatre without proof of double vaccination, and you have to wear a mask all the way through. And do you know what? Broadway is doing extremely well. It's not quite back up to the figures that it was before the pandemic, but it is doing really well, and everybody lives with it, and everybody just gets on with their lives.
What does that tell you? People are determined to have a good time.
Well, I think it's determined to go out. I mean, as I say, you can't even buy a cup of coffee. You certainly couldn't go and sit down in a restaurant without proof of double vaccination. And that strikes me that if that is what we have to do, it's a pretty low price to pay. And particularly in America, nobody cares. I mean, even if you're just going to see somebody in their own apartment, you've got to wear a mask when you go through the foyer. So that's the situation there. And everybody, certainly in New York, because every state's different, of course,
yes.
But certainly in New York, which is where I've been, people accept that as the normal.
Do you think we should have that here?
I think if it gets really bad here, then that's the obvious thing to do, is we can't go through another lockdown again. And also, it's not really proven that these lockdowns now are necessary.
No, but what would the actual handling, the process of ensuring people, if they were to attend a theatre, let's come back to the West End, how would that be done to ensure that someone is good to go, is allowed in?
Well, it's particularly easy. I'm not a guy who knows too much about technology, but I mean, all you do is to show that you've got a piece of paper, if it's a piece of paper or on your phone, that you've been double vaccinated, and there's no queue to get into the theatre, that's meaningful, because all the technology to check all of that exists for tickets anyway.
And how is the West End?
Well, the West End is doing, I think, pretty well. It gets unhelpful when you suddenly start having hints about lockdowns and all of that, and you see then that things, what we call the wraps, which is the money that's being taken every day in advance, you see them going down. But I would say at the moment it's very, very buoyant. In fact, really, really good. But I think the problem might be when we get to January. People are not booking way in advance like they used to do.
Why might that be, do you suppose?
I suppose just people. Well, I think it's the older audience is a little worried about coming into London. I mean, I was just talking to Sonia Friedman, in New York, who's doing Harry Potter there. She's saying actually the older audience for the plays is pretty good. I've seen in our theatres. One of them is Frozen, well, that's a family audience, but say Back to the Future, skewing very heavily towards younger men, and Cinderella, we got an audience there that I haven't really had before, which is a lot of youngish girls, young women, really love that show. And that's where we're going, whereas the older audience is possibly a little under for that, compared with some of mine.
Do you think people are nervous? Do you think, I'm not going to book in February, in case there's a lockdown, in case there's another wave, in case there's another strain?
Yes, I think that's right. I think that people are not booking quite so far ahead. But again, I always remind everybody that, the theatres and our theatres have no recycled air. They've got the best ventilation systems that we could possibly have put in. And you're probably safer in the theatre than you are outside it.
the very slight suggestions of tougher measures or lockdowns. What would you say to the Prime Minister, Andrew?
What I would say is have a look seriously at what's happening in New York. And look, nobody wants to wear a mask in the theatre. Nobody wants to prove that they've had, 2 vaccines. I was actually thinking to myself, I've had now 5 doses of various vaccines and had no ill effects at all. And, it just seems to me that the one thing everybody has got to do is, whether they like it or not, get vaccinated.
Couple of last things. You've played your first DJ set.
Ah, yes. Well, they're building a theatre for me, or a hotel for me in Ibiza as we speak.
What gave you that idea?
Well, we just thought to do something to celebrate Phantom of the Opera, opening in New York, because I suppose it's the oldest show there. It's been the longest-running Broadway musical ever. So we decided to do something rather different, and we did a remix of various bits and pieces from Phantom, which were very, very funny.
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, we had closed off. We actually managed to close off the entire street.
One other line that's come out, Sir Tim Rice, your long-standing collaborator, said you almost wrote a James Bond-themed musical.
Well, when we were thinking, we were asked by College Court School, which was a prep school, for St Paul's, and they asked us, well, the music master asked us whether we'd write a piece for them, for the kids, and we thought, well, what about a James Bond story? And then we thought, that's not going to work. And we went back to the Bible and did Joseph the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. No, I think, thank goodness we did.
Yes, absolutely. And lastly, a word about Monday night, the special night in aid of the Malala Fund at Cinderella. Just a word about that.
Well, it's just to bring people's awareness of the plight of, particularly of women, who are refugees. And Malala's always been very vocal about this from the word go. So we really thought that it would be... Cinderella really was the right show for that particular gala, for that particular cause. And I'm, as I say, been an enormous admirer of hers.
Yes.
And I think it'll be a nice evening anyway.
I wish you the best of fortune.
Thank you very much.
Great to see you. Thank you very much for coming by the studio. Lloyd Webber appearing here on LBC, where the time is 9. That's Monday night, of course, that special performance of Cinderella, the gala performance, in aid of Malala Yousafzai's charity. 9:30, news on LBC. Simon Conway.
A 13-year-old boy is in a critical condition in hospital after being shot in the back in Birmingham. West Midlands police say the shooting happened in the Hockley Circus area last night. No arrests have been made. Albania's ambassador to the UK has strongly denied reports